Thanks, Tim, and it's lovely to be here. And oh, I wish I only had 100 churches in the diocese. We have the Diocese of Leeds has 604 churches, 250 church schools, and about 450 clergy properties. So the whole estate is quite large, and I am the half-time environment officer for the diocese. But let me go back to the beginning and tell you a little bit about our journey towards becoming a carbon net zero church.
Let me just tell you a little bit of the journey that we've been on as the Church of England, and more locally within the Diocese of Leeds, on our journey to becoming a net zero church. And this started sometime actually before I was involved, when the Lambeth Conference, the conference of bishops from across the Anglican Communion, gathered in 1988 and set 5 marks of mission for the Church of England. And the 5th of those was to safeguard the integrity of creation. And it's always been a slight frustration that that's number 5. They shouldn't really be numbered. I think they are integral, because it's very hard to do some of the other marks of mission, like teaching the gospel, without including creation care, or meeting needs and social action, which doesn't include the impacts of climate change or biodiversity loss. So those marks of missions have sat there for some time, and gradually safeguarding the integrity of creation has come to the fore. In 2007, the Church of England started a Shrinking the Footprint campaign, and that was a kind of in a way a bit of work that was a sort of prophetic work in the wilderness, and I joined the Darson Environment Group at that point, and sat through many meetings where I was quite frustrated by the level of conversation that we were having. It seemed that planting a few bulbs in the churchyard was seen as a great success in some churches, whereas I was at that point aware of the impending climate crisis that was really already upon us at that point. And it took some time for that prophetic voice, that small group who were advocating for change, to actually have their voice heard. And that came really in February 2020, when the National Environmental Working Group, which again I am now part of, put forward a motion to General Synod, which is like the Parliament of the Church of England, if you like, the decision-making body. We put forward a motion to set a 2045 net zero target for the Church of England, acknowledging that the Church of England has a huge estate of very difficult to decarbonise buildings. And during that debate, several people spoke, particularly young people spoke very movingly about the need and the urgency to take action, and why, as Christian people, it was imperative that we took action and showed leadership and were a prophetic voice in this space. And an amendment was put that we should be carbon net zero by 2030. And I remember distinctly speaking afterwards to one of the members of General Synod, who said to me, when they had heard somebody standing in opposition to that, speaking about the fact that this was a distraction from the main purpose of the church, which was saving souls, they decided that they would vote for the 2030 amendment. They were so frustrated by the narrow-mindedness of that gospel position. So we ended up with a 2030 carbon net zero target, which for those of us who had put the motion was quite a shock, because, as I say, the challenge of being net zero by that date is enormous. And so to the next part of the story, really, which is where the hard graft started, and how decarbonising the church is an act of love. It's an act of sacrifice, and it is a prophetic stance, speaking to wider society, that we are going on this journey. So my role includes calculating the carbon emissions for the diocese. It's a lovely fun job with a spreadsheet, and we have a carbon footprint as a diocese of about 18,000 tonnes of carbon dioxide from our operations. So as I say, we have church buildings, church halls, cathedrals, clergy properties, church schools, diocesan offices, staff travel, and we also have some land, some glebe land, all of which are on this journey. It involves, as I say, hard work in terms of collecting data, changing policies, but what we found was that having this national decision from the Church of England meant that we could really move much faster and harder. It was a peg to hang all this action on that previously we'd struggled to get much traction for. So a key moment in having that leadership from our decision-making body as a church. And like many have said on this conference before, it's quite difficult to get people on board with this. And again, a light bulb moment for me was when a theologian described this as that climate change and the biodiversity crisis are the context into which we are now preaching the gospel. It is not an issue. It's not something that just a few people can deal with. We are all in this context. And what does the Christian gospel look like in that context? Yes, it was Reverend Ruth Newton, just looking at the chat. So we need to think about what our churches look like and how they can preach the gospel. So I don't know whether I'm running over time, Tim, and could tell you a little bit about a couple of churches. Yep. So just to give you a couple of examples, so we have a fantastic rural church, St John's Sharrow, near Ripon, and they have gone down the Eco Church path. So they have a Silver Eco Church Award. They draw out and emphasize creation care in their worship week by week. It's embedded within their worship, and they see creation care as part of their mission as a church. They've managed their churchyard so that it's very biodiverse. For those in the know, they have a thriving M8 grassland, which is top grade in terms of biodiversity. And they use the churchyard for outreach, because people come through, they walk through because there's a footpath going through. So they engage with people in conversation about nature and God, and they use it for the local school coming in to talk about both the heritage of the churchyard and about creation care. And they are on a journey to decarbonising their heat. So they're looking at whether they can install solar panels and move to an electric heating system so that they can come away from fossil fuels. In contrast, All Hallows is a very inner city urban church in Leeds, and they also have a Silver Eco Church Award. They run a food waste cafe, meeting the needs of local people, as it's pay as you feel cafe, and they've, as a church, have made a statement of divestment from fossil fuels and have moved their finances away from any banks or institutions that invest in fossil fuels. and their care for creation is fully embedded within the life of the church and the mission of the church. I'm going to stop there because I want to allow a bit of time for questions if that's possible. So over to Tim.
You've been admirably brief, Jemima. So if you have any more inspiring examples, please feel free to feed them in. But we'll start the question time, and we've got plenty of time for questions. So do put your hand up or put something into the box. But I've got Michelle first, and then David. If you would like to ask your question, Michelle, that'd be great.
Yeah, so it's about your carbon calculation, Jemima. What period of time was that over?
Oh, so 18,000 tons annually.
Right, and do you count anything that's offsetting those as well, or is it like literally just what's contributing towards it?
Yeah, sorry, I should have said that's a very, very good technical question. That's a net figure. So we now have a national carbon calculation tool, which churches have to send data back to the national church anyway, annually through an online parish return. Then we now have something called the energy footprinting tool, which collects energy use data, and in the Diocese of Leeds we've established a renewable electricity tariff scheme. We work with an energy broker, so churches can use that. They can use other people if they wish to, but that's called the Green Journey. It's actually open to any church, so if any of your churches want to use it, they're very welcome to. There are details on our website. It's called the Green Journey, and so if churches are using 100% renewable electricity, they can deduct that from their in our counting. So if that helps. Yeah.
Thank you, Jemima. Could I ask David to put his question?
Yeah, thanks, Jemima. I obviously am from the city of Leeds. I work with the Reverend John Swales, and I think you know is fairly passionate about this stuff. I think he would ask the question, and I guess so would I, in terms of getting to net zero. How much does it include Church of England investments, which I know is quite a big thing, quite a tricky thing. But how much does that include when it comes to kind of working towards net zero?
Yeah, so it's really interesting question about the church investments. So some of you will know the Church of England has a really large pot of investments which are managed by the church commissioners, and those go towards funding some of the life of the church, but also in order to pay for clergy pensions. And the Church of England has, the church commissioners have been leading on something called the TPI, the Transitions Pathway Initiative. So they have been grading all the different investments according to their whether they're on the pathway to net zero, and this has been a major initiative that the whole secular investment movement has come behind. I think they've got it's trillions of pounds now using this transition pathway that the Church of England have been leading on, so that has been a really positive step that as churches on the ground we don't really see, but actually within the investment world the Church of England is really highly regarded for this work that they've been doing. There's been concern from members of the Church of England that those church investments haven't been completely divested from fossil fuels yet, and the Church of England took a pragmatic approach of engagement. So they've held very, very small holdings in a few fossil fuel companies still, in order for them to engage with those fossil fuel companies and to try to, as shareholders, be in shareholders meetings and push those fossil fuel companies towards net zero and the transition. They're really tiny amounts. I can't quote them to you, but they're kind of like less than 1% of the Church of England's investments. They're really, really small, but they've been held on to in order to be able to have this position of speaking into those situations, and that is to be reviewed later this year. So I have to say, compared to many secular bodies, you know, I'm just always amazed at how much the Church of England has done and utilised its investments to affect change.
Thanks, Jemima.
Thanks. That's a very comprehensive answer there to quite a difficult question. Paul, you had a question. Would you like to put yours?
Yeah, it's interesting the thing about the 2020 carbon neutral thing. I'm interested. I've only just discovered that there's a scope 1 and a scope 2 and a scope 3. So presumably that's a scope 1 declaration, is it?
Really good question, Paul. Sorry, I didn't drill down into that because it's, again, this is all the technicalities of carbon footprints. No, it's fine. It's great. It's a great question because it gives me more chance to talk about it. Having declared we were going to get to carbon net zero by 2030, we actually then had to define what that was going to be. Kind of would have been good if we'd done it the other way around, but we didn't. So, you know, we're all learning on this journey. The decision was taken for it to be scope 1 and scope 2 emissions. So just so everyone's clear, scope 1 are where fossil fuels are burnt directly. So that would be your gas heating in your church building or your church school, or oil heating, or petrol or diesel from travel. And we'd also do scope 2, which is where fossil fuels are burnt indirectly. So that's for generating electricity. So that's your church electricity. But we decided not to include scope 3, and that's where fossil fuels are burnt from the supply chain. So that would be, say, the manufacture of paper used in church. It would be the church investments, as David's touched on that. Building materials for church repairs. The emissions from the water used in the church. A whole range of things fall into scope 3. And actually, we just felt that it was challenging enough to start with scope 1 and 2, and I can see that as a church we will move to scope 3 post 2030.
Right, thank you very much. Perhaps I could just put one final question to you, Jemima. I'm struck once again this morning that you've been on this journey as an organisation for decades, and we're very, very late to the party in our work, and it's really only in the last handful of years that many ChristCentral churches have begun to seriously question what we do. I just wonder, from the benefit of that experience, how much effort you still put into convincing people of the need to join us on this journey, or are you content that perhaps with the majority, perhaps a large majority of people who support it with their heads and their hearts, that you just continue anyway and ignore the voices that argue against from within the church? It'd be interesting to know what your experience is in trying to reach out to people still after decades of work.
Yeah, I think thank you, Tim. Good question. I think now the majority are know we have to do something. It's a question of where it sits in terms of people's priorities. And within the Diocese of Leeds, we've set up a structure where we're encouraging every church to have a parish environment officer, so a champion, like we've been talking about on the call before, to lead. It's really encouraging now with our leadership coming through. Ordinands are receiving really good theological training and practical training on this coming through our theological colleges. I have to say that some of that's not necessarily the case with all clergy who've been in post for a long time. We've also embarked on a program of carbon literacy training for our diocesan staff, so that they understand how this fits into their everyday jobs, you know, depending on what their role is. People in the finance team, people in the education department, all sorts of roles for helping them to come on board. So I would say it is a very small minority who are what we might describe as climate deniers, or maybe more climate delayers now. But yeah, there are still those conversations to be had.
Hi there, it's a joy to join you at CreationCall conference, and my thanks to CreationCall for the invitation to highlight Zambia and the impact of climate change on the churches here in Zambia. In this short presentation, what I'll do is to just introduce our churches. Secondly, look at the impact of climate on our churches in Zambia. Then thirdly, highlight some of the responses that we've had as churches and look at some possible future engagements. Let me first introduce myself. I'm Joseph. Lily, my wife, and I, with our 4 kids, live in Zambia. We have the privilege of being part of the ChristCentral apostolic team with Jeremy Simpkins. And I oversee teams here in Zambia and serving teams in neighboring countries of Malawi, Kenya, Tanzania, Congo, and now looking at Uganda and South Africa. Here in Zambia, at ChristCentral churches, we serve around 40 to 50 churches, mainly in the central province and Copperbelt, as well as western and southern provinces of Zambia. These churches are equally split between rural and urban churches. So basically, they are poor churches served by self-supporting leaders who are connected to us. This means that most of the leaders don't draw a salary from most of these churches, but they support themselves and hope to carry out their church roles that way. ChristCentral Zambia has also 2 leadership teams, 2 leadership schools. We call them School of Leadership, that train and equip these leaders. The climate change point has been an issue here in Zambia. And personally, as a church leader, I've not really been thinking a lot, like many church leaders across Africa. But recent years and the impact of climate change on our churches and people have drawn our attention. So when John at CreationCall called on us as an apostolic team with ChristCentral, I had already been dealing with this issue for the past 5 years in responding to the impact. So what is the impact of climate change in Zambia? Let me just highlight that very briefly. As many of you know, Zambia is a poor nation with poverty levels ranging around 64%. Obviously, that's not caused by climate change, but the climate change has significantly increased the threats of these poor neighborhoods on the underlying causes of that. So, in common with other Zambians, ChristCentral churches here in Zambia have not been immune to the impact of that. I could probably highlight the main impact as, number 1, impact of drought and water shortage. This results in the destruction of crops, also bringing floods in certain areas that can destroy crops, infrastructure and homes. In addition to existing problems of soil erosion, which we always suffer here in this part of the world, floods also cause contamination that could lead to health problems as water sources are contaminated. So we've had cholera, for example, in the recent years. National data from our government is showing that these weather patterns also are resulting in consistent reduced harvest, thereby threatening livelihoods of families and serious food shortages. So this is a clear impact of climate and a threat to our churches and our families. Of course, like anywhere else, when livelihoods are threatened, people respond. So let me just mention a couple of individual responses that people have been doing on their own. Migration is one of them. So they move from affected areas to areas less affected. The impact of that is that may result in no or less access to health facilities as they move to other areas. Children obviously stop going to school, partly because they are in an area where there is less access to education. Also, we've noticed in some areas, in particular an area called Skaunzu in Southern Province, where we have churches, that men have moved out of their normal villages to areas near the Zambezi River to take their cattle there for water. This has resulted in some social problems, including marital problems, leading to family breakup as the family unit is disturbed. Another response from people in an effort to make ends meet is charcoal burning. So they burn trees, they burn charcoal into charcoal to make some money for themselves, resulting in deforestation, making the land less resilient to climate change. And we've also noticed that in most rural areas, the grass is burnt by villagers to clear for farming, but also some of them do it in order to expose rodents like rats, which are eaten in some of these areas. So it actually provides some short-term food relief to some of these families. Of course, that degrades the environment and reduces productivity. So in summary, what we could say that climate change has widely impacted Zambia and our churches, and it brings a threat. It's a major threat to livelihoods of people. So how have we responded as a group of churches? Mainly in 3 areas, but others included. First of all, foundations of farming. We have implemented foundation farming strategies. As some of you may be aware, foundations farming was originally called Farming God's Way, introduced by our friends in Zimbabwe as a way to mitigate climate change and also improve food production. So we are thankful for Bread Trust, who has been working with that over the last 4 or 5 years to implement this strategy. To date, we have trained around 180 people in affected areas in this Foundations for Farming strategy. So some people were able to adopt to it and have used it to significantly increase production compared to previous methods, and these improvements have mitigated the impact of climate change on those households. Although changing patterns in rainfall means that the rain-fed method of growing crops has been at threat as we have more droughts, but also flooding means that the crops are completely flooded, meaning that even foundations for farming can't help a lot, but however, it enables families to respond in those areas. We've had resistance in some places, mainly due to a complete reduction to ox-drawn farming, meaning that no tillage is not always very welcome. Also, grass as a mulch competes with feeding livestock on the same grass. So again, that becomes an issue. It's a balance on how we deal with that. Secondly, traditionally, most of these households have been doing this for generations. So a lot of people, when you tell them to stop tilling the land, what we call no tillage, they're competing against tradition and basically years of their families doing this. So a lot of households have kind of resisted or gone very slow to stop. So we continue. Foundations for Farming, it's had a lot of success, but mainly in rural areas of Zambia. The second one is that we have adopted chicken rearing as a way of diversification to allow families earn some money, get the manure which they can use for vegetable growing as a mitigation. So where there's been low yields, that this could help the families have protein, but also grow vegetables as a result of the impact of climate. So far, with the help of, again, Bread Trust, we have had a pilot in Southern Province where 11 households have been participating in chicken rearing on top of the Foundations for Farming. Also on the Copper Belt, we've got groups of young people where we have formed clubs. We call them Arise Clubs, and these have had a positive impact to mitigate the loss of incomes as a result of climate change. I'm a director in an organization called Arise Zambia, and we've been involved in promoting chicken rearing in Southern Province, but also in other parts of Zambia as a way of diversifying families into that. What's happened actually is that this is having significant positive impact, that I've had Tier Fund coming to us asking if we can move into their areas where they're working to promote effective poultry farming in addition to what these families are doing. The other organization is World Vision Zambia, that obviously has got significant funding to help some of these households. So basically, chicken rearing is a good option, and working with other organizations like Heartlands, which is a Christian company, poultry company, international company that has come to Zambia. They've invited us to partner with them to help affected families mitigate the impact of climate change in affected areas. The second thing we've been doing is borehole drilling over the last few years. This directly impacts in areas where there is drought. So in Scoundsway, an area in Southern Province, we've had to drill boreholes, initially with the help of a local church in the UK, and later on Bread Trust sponsored some of those initiatives. It provides clean water to the community, but also the borehole provides irrigation options in case of a drought. And so this has been an initiative. The government has actually been encouraging this, that we could empower rural poor families with boreholes, which enables them to be less dependent on what we call rain-fed farming, where they're totally dependent on rain. They can have options to irrigate some of their crops. So as a group of churches, we're trusting God for some significant funding to strategically dig boreholes where our churches are in these areas. So they become actually, if you like, well-watered gardens, and prophetically feeding practically water into these communities as they go through this climate change. Besides foundation for farming, chicken rearing, and digging boreholes, we are encouraging other initiatives. For example, tree planting. In fact, one of our team members has planted a number of trees on his farm, and these are also citrus trees that provides an initial yield of fruit and other foods, but at the same time mitigates the impact of climate change by actually absorbing some of the CO2 being emitted elsewhere. We're working with initiatives like, as I said, Arise Zambia and Heartlands to mitigate the impact of that. Also, there are organizations like Waymaker in the UK and others that are beginning to work with us at ChristCentral and others to raise not just awareness but significant funding to unlock these communities in combating the effect of climate change on their livelihoods. In conclusion, what I would like to say is that as a group of churches, we are aware of our communities. I'm thankful that Jeremy and our apostolic team have adopted some of the initiatives through CreationCall to raise awareness amongst our churches in the UK and elsewhere to the plight of our lifestyles on the climate and the impact it's having on our people and churches elsewhere. Many would say it is a justice issue, as lifestyles of other people actually impact the livelihoods of neighborhoods and churches elsewhere. So we're hoping that in the next coming few years that ChristCentral Zambia is already a hub, bringing not only awareness to our churches as I'm doing right now, but also as a hub to deliver help, training and assistance, also relief help to affected neighborhoods and churches in our parts of the world, in Zambia, but also going into Malawi, Kenya, Tanzania, and neighboring countries. So thank you so much for giving us the opportunity to highlight this. Austin, one of our team members, will be available to answer questions if there is time, as he has been personally and practically involved in some of the situations that I have highlighted. Thank you for listening to me, and enjoy the rest of the conference.